The champagne flute exploded against the marble floor of the penthouse, crystal fragments catching the city lights like fallen stars. Lila Reeves stared at the destruction, her chest heaving with a rage that had been building for 3 years. 24 stories below, Manhattan pulsed with life, oblivious to the world crumbling in the glass tower above. "You magnificent fool," she whispered to the empty room, her voice echoing off the pristine walls that had become her prison. The evening had started with such promise. The merger between Hartwell Industries and Chen Pharmaceuticals was supposed to be her moment of triumph, the culmination of everything she'd sacrificed. As the lead architect of the deal worth $3 billion, Lila had orchestrated every detail with surgical precision. But now, standing in the aftermath of betrayal, she realized she'd been played from the very beginning. Her phone buzzed against the Italian leather sofa. Another message from David Hartwell, the golden boy CEO whose smile had once made her believe in fairy tales. The same smile that had convinced her to sell her soul for a corner office and a love that turned out to be as hollow as the promises he whispered in the dark. The apartment door burst open without warning. Lila spun around, her silk dress swirling like liquid smoke, expecting to see David with his usual bouquet of apologies. Instead, a stranger filled the doorway. Tall and lean, with the kind of sharp angles that suggested he'd been carved from something harder than stone, he surveyed the scene with eyes the color of winter storms. "Ms. Reeves." His voice carried a slight accent she couldn't place, smooth as aged whiskey, but with an edge that made her skin prickle. "We need to talk. I don't know who you are, but you need to leave now." Lila's hand moved instinctively toward the panic button hidden beneath the marble countertop, but something in his posture made her hesitate. He stepped into the apartment, closing the door behind him with deliberate calm. "And if you press that button, David Hartwell will have you killed within the hour." The words hit her like physical blows. "What are you talking about?" Adrian's gaze swept over the shattered champagne glass, the scattered documents from her briefcase, the lipstick stain on the mirror where she'd written and erased David's name a dozen times. "You discovered the truth about the merger tonight. The real reason Hartwell wanted Chen Pharmaceuticals wasn't for their legitimate research. How could you possibly know that?" Lila's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Because I've been tracking David's illegal drug trials for 2 years. Adrian moved closer, and she caught the scent of rain and something darker, something dangerous. Experimental medications tested on vulnerable populations in Southeast Asia. Children, Ms. Reeves. He's been using children." The room seemed to tilt. Lila gripped the back of the sofa for support as the pieces fell into place. The mysterious budget allocations she'd questioned, the restricted files David claimed, were above her clearance level. The way he'd grown cold, whenever she pressed too hard about the specifics of Chen's research division, "You're lying." But even as she said it, she knew he wasn't. "I wish I were." Adrian pulled out a tablet, his fingers flying across the screen. Dr. Sarah Chen discovered what her company was really being used for. She tried to expose Hartwell 3 months ago. Dr. Chen died in a car accident. Dr. Chen was murdered. Adrian turned the tablet toward her, showing surveillance footage of a woman in a lab coat, her face animated with desperate urgency as she spoke into a hidden camera. This was recorded the night before her death. The video had no sound, but Lila could read the fear in Sarah Chen's eyes, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder as if she knew death was already reaching for her. And there, in the background of the final frame, was David Hartwell's face, cold and calculating as he watched from the shadows. Oh God. Lila sank onto the sofa, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "I helped him. I made the merger possible." "Yes, you did." Adrian's honesty was brutal, but his tone held no judgment. "The question is what you're going to do about it now." Outside, storm clouds gathered over the city, turning the sky the color of bruises. Thunder rolled in the distance, and Lila felt something shift inside her chest. Some fundamental understanding of who she was and what she was capable of. "Why are you telling me this? What do you want?" Adrian studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling that he was seeing parts of her she'd forgotten existed. "I want David Hartwell to pay for what he's done. I think you're the only person who can help me destroy him." The apartment plunged into darkness as lightning split the sky. In the momentary illumination, Lila saw something in Adrian's expression that made her pulse quicken with a mixture of terror and recognition. He was damaged, just like her. Dangerous, just like her. And for the first time in 3 years, she felt truly alive. "If I help you," she said softly, "there's no going back." "No," Adrian agreed, moving close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "There isn't." As if summoned by their words, the elevator chimed in the distance. "David!" Private key, the one only 3 people in the world possessed. He was coming home, probably with another lie ready on his lips. Another way to make her feel small and grateful for the crumbs of affection he threw her way. Lila looked at Adrian, at the stranger who'd just shattered her illusions and offered her something she'd thought was lost forever. A choice. A chance to be more than David Hartwell's beautiful, obedient weapon. "Hide in the bedroom," she whispered urgently. "Whatever happens, don't come out until I give you a signal." "What signal?" The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and David's voice carried across the apartment, honey-sweet and utterly false. "Lila, sweetheart, I'm home." She turned to Adrian, her decision crystallizing with terrifying clarity. "When I scream..." David Hartwell stepped into the penthouse like he owned the very air, his tailored suit immaculate despite the storm raging outside. At 35, he possessed the kind of effortless magnetism that had built empires and broken hearts in equal measure. But tonight, Lila saw him with new eyes. The golden god she'd worshipped revealed himself as something far more sinister. "You're home late," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady as she swept the crystal fragments under the sofa with her foot. Board meeting ran long. David's smile was perfect, practiced. He moved toward her with predatory grace, but stopped when he noticed the scattered papers. "Rough evening. Just going over the merger details one more time?" Lila watched his face carefully, searching for cracks in the facade. "I found some interesting discrepancies in Chen Pharmaceuticals' research division." The change was subtle, but unmistakable. David's shoulders tensed, and something cold flickered behind his warm brown eyes. Discrepancies. Budget allocations that don't match the reported projects. Facilities in Myanmar and Bangladesh that aren't listed in any official documentation. Lila moved closer, testing his reaction. "What exactly are we buying, David?" "You're overthinking things, sweetheart." He reached for her, but she stepped back. The endearment that once made her pulse race now felt like acid on her skin. "The international facilities are classified. Government contracts. You know how bureaucracy works." "Government contracts for what?" David's mask slipped completely. The warm lover disappeared, replaced by the ruthless CEO who'd built his fortune on the bones of his competitors. "You're asking the wrong questions, Lila." "Am I?" She lifted her chin, channeling every ounce of steel she'd learned to hide beneath silken smiles. "Or am I finally asking the right ones?" The slap came without warning, snapping her head to the side with enough force to split her lip. Lila tasted blood, metallic and sharp, but the pain felt distant compared to the rage building in her chest. In 3 years, he'd never laid a hand on her. But then she'd never questioned him before. "You ungrateful little bitch." David's voice dripped with contempt. "Do you have any idea what I've done for you? Where you'd be without me?" Lila touched her bleeding lip, staring at the crimson on her fingertips. "Enlighten me." "You were nobody. When I found you, a junior analyst with delusions of grandeur and daddy issues so deep they showed on every psychological evaluation." He circled her like a shark, his earlier charm completely stripped away. "I made you into something beautiful, something useful. Useful for covering up murder." The words hung between them like a blade. David went completely still, and Lila realized she'd just signed her death warrant. But strangely, she felt no fear, only a crystalline clarity that cut through years of manipulation and lies. "Who told you about Sarah Chen?" His voice was deadly quiet. "Does it matter? The question is, how many others have died for your ambition?" David laughed, but the sound held no warmth. Sarah Chen was weak. She couldn't see the bigger picture. Revolutionary medicine requires revolutionary methods. I mean, murdering children requires closing your eyes to basic humanity. Those children were going to die anyway. David's casual dismissal sent ice through her veins. Disease, poverty, war. At least their death served a greater purpose. Lila stared at the man she'd loved, searching for any trace of the person she'd thought she knew. But there was nothing. No remorse, no recognition of the horror he'd unleashed. Just cold calculation and the absolute certainty that he was right. "You're insane. I'm visionary." "There's a difference." David moved to the bar, pouring himself 3 fingers of bourbon as if they were discussing stock options instead of genocide. "The medications we developed will save millions of lives. History will vindicate everything we've done. We." Pronoun tasted like poison. "You think your hands are clean? You facilitated every transaction, structured every deal, made every connection that allowed this research to continue." David raised his glass in a mock toast. "You're as complicit as I am, sweetheart." The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. Every signature, every presentation, every brilliant strategic decision had been another nail in the coffins of innocence she'd never known existed. She was drowning in her own complicity, choking on the weight of what she'd enabled. "The difference between us," she said quietly, "is that I didn't know what I was doing. And now that you do?" David set down his glass, his expression shifting to something almost gentle. "What exactly do you plan to do about it?" "Go to the police, the FBI. Half of them are on my payroll. The other half wouldn't believe you without evidence. Maybe I have evidence." David's laugh was genuinely amused. "No, you don't. You're brilliant." "Lila, but you're not a spy. You wouldn't know how to gather real evidence if your life depended on it." From the bedroom came the softest whisper of movement, so subtle that David didn't notice. But Lila heard it, and she felt a strange comfort knowing Adrian was listening, witnessing this moment when her entire world revealed its true nature. "You're right," she said finally. "I'm not a spy, but I know someone who is." David's expression changed from amusement to confusion to dawning realization. "Who else knows about this? Someone who's been watching you far longer than I have. Someone who actually knows how to gather evidence." Lila smiled, tasting blood on her lips. "Someone who's going to destroy you." The bourbon glass shattered against the wall behind her head, missing her by inches. David's perfect composure finally cracked completely, revealing the monster that had been hiding beneath the designer suits and practiced charm. "You stupid, naive little girl." He grabbed her throat, his fingers tightening with methodical precision. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Lila couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, but she managed to smile. Because in that moment, choking on David's rage and her own blood, she finally understood what Adrian had seen in her. Not the polished weapon David had created, but the woman she'd buried beneath years of his manipulation. The woman who was finally ready to fight back, as darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. Lila gathered the last of her strength and did exactly what she'd promised. Adrian she would do, she screamed. Adrian exploded from the bedroom like a force of nature, his body moving with lethal precision as David spun toward the sound. The two men collided with bone-crushing impact, sending them both crashing into the marble coffee table. A glass and blood scattered across imported Persian rugs as they fought with the desperate violence of predators recognizing their equal. Lila collapsed to her knees, gasping for air through her bruised throat, watching as years of careful planning erupted into chaos. David might have been a monster, but he was also a former college boxer with rage fueling his movements. Leaner but faster, his strikes carrying the calculated efficiency of someone who'd killed before. "Who the hell are you?" David snarled, landing a vicious uppercut that snapped Adrian's head back. "You're reckoning?" Adrian spat blood and smiled, the expression transforming his sharp features into something genuinely terrifying. He caught David's next punch and twisted, the sound of breaking bone echoing through the penthouse. David screamed, cradling his shattered wrist, but his eyes never left Adrian's face. Even in agony, his mind was working, processing threats and calculating advantages. You're not FBI. CIA doesn't operate domestically. So what are you? I'm someone who's seen the mass graves in Myanmar. Adrian's voice carried a weight that made Lila's chest tighten. Someone who held dying children in his arms while you counted your profits from a Manhattan boardroom. The confession hit Lila like a physical blow. Adrian hadn't just been investigating David's crimes from a distance. He'd been there, witnessed the suffering firsthand. The haunted look she'd glimpsed in his eyes wasn't just determination. It was trauma, deep and unhealed. You were there, David said, understanding dawning in his expression. You're one of Chen's people. I was Dr. Chen's research partner before she discovered what you were really funding. Adrian moved closer, his damaged knuckles leaving bloody prints on his torn shirt. I was in the field when your security team came to sanitize the operation. Impossible. Everyone at those facilities died in the bombings. Everyone but me. Adrian's smile was a blade. I spent 6 months in a Myanmar hospital, learning to walk again while you celebrated your successful cover-up. But I remembered everything. Every face, every name, every child who died because of your ambition. Lila watched this exchange with growing horror. She'd thought Adrian was some kind of government agent, someone operating within legal boundaries. But the truth was far more complex, far more dangerous. He was a man driven by personal vengeance, willing to use any means necessary to achieve his goals, including her. You played me, she whispered, the realization cutting deeper than David's earlier betrayal. This whole thing tonight showing me the evidence, making me question everything. You needed someone inside David's operation. Adrian's expression didn't change, but she saw acknowledgement in his winter storm eyes. I needed someone with access, you son of a bitch. Lila struggled to her feet, her body shaking with exhaustion and rage. I'm not your weapon. Neither. Am I yours? Adrian replied, his gaze shifting between her and David. But we all use what we have to survive. David laughed despite his broken wrist, the sound sharp with hysteria. Beautiful. You've been manipulated by both of us, sweetheart. How does it feel to be the pawn in someone else's game? The words stung, because they carried truth. For 3 years, David had shaped her into his perfect accomplice. Tonight, Adrian had shaped her into his perfect informant. Both men had seen her intelligence, her skills, her desperate need to matter, and used those qualities for their own ends. Shut up, she said quietly, but neither man was listening. The difference between us, Adrian said to David, is that I never pretended to love her. Love? David's laughter intensified. You think I loved that ambitious little nothing? She was a tool, perfectly crafted for my needs. Beautiful enough to be an asset, smart enough to be useful, damaged enough to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention I threw her way. I said, shut up. Lila's voice was louder now, but they continued their deadly dance around her, as if she were furniture. At least I was honest about my intentions from the beginning, Adrian continued. You spent 3 years convincing her she was special, while using her to facilitate mass murder, and you spent 3 hours convincing her she was betrayed while using her to facilitate my destruction. David clutched his broken wrist but managed to smile. We're not so different, you and I, shut up. The roar that erupted from Lila's throat silenced both men. She stood between them, blood on her lips and fury in her eyes, finally seeing the situation with perfect clarity. They were both right, they were both wrong. And she was done being anyone's tool. You want to know the difference? Between you? She asked, her voice deadly calm. David is a monster who destroys everything he touches. But you, Adrian, you're something worse. You're a monster who makes other people believe they're choosing to help you. Adrian's face went carefully blank. Lila, don't. She held up a hand, and something in her tone made him step back. 3 years ago, I was nobody. Brilliant, ambitious, hungry, but nobody. David saw that and decided to own me. You saw that and decided to use me. Neither of you ever asked what I wanted. What do you want? David asked, genuine curiosity replacing his earlier mockery. Lila looked at him, at the man who'd broken her. Heartened shattered her innocence. Then she looked at Adrian, the stranger who'd offered her truth wrapped in lies. It's both dangerous, both necessary. both completely wrong about who she really was. "I want justice," she said finally. "Not your revenge, Adrian. Not your version of success, David. Real justice for the people who died." She moved to David's laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Both men watched. As she navigated through encrypted files, her security clearance still active. Her intimate knowledge of David's systems giving her access to information that had been hidden for years. "What are you doing?" Adrian asked. "What I should have done months ago." Lila's voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she uploaded files to a secure server. Financial records, research data, correspondence between David and his international contacts. Everything needed to expose the full scope of his operation. "You can't," David said, lunging toward her despite his injury. "Those files will destroy both of us, I know." Lila hit send and stepped back, feeling something settle in her chest for the first time in years. "I'm counting on it." The silence that followed was broken by the soft chime of her phone receiving a message, then another and another. News alerts, government contacts, investigative journalists. The story was spreading like wildfire across every platform. She'd carefully cultivated over 3 years of building David's empire. "Jesus Christ," Adrian whispered, staring at the laptop screen. "Do you realize what you've just done?" "I've told the truth." Lila smiled, and for the first time in her life, the expression felt genuine. "All of it, including my own role in David's crimes." "You'll go to prison," David said, his face pale with shock. "Probably." Lila picked up her purse, checking that her passport was still inside. "But at least I'll go there as myself, not as someone's carefully constructed lie." She moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at the two men who'd shaped her life in such devastating ways. "You were both wrong about me," she said softly. "I was never nobody. I was just sleeping." As Lila walked toward the elevator, she heard Adrian call her name. But she didn't turn around. Behind her, the two most dangerous men she'd ever known were left to deal with the consequences of underestimating the woman they'd created between them. The elevator doors opened, and Lila stepped inside, finally ready to face whatever came next. On her own terms. Asterisk, 6 months later. Lila sat in a sterile interrogation room in Lower Manhattan, her hands cuffed to a metal table that had seen countless confessions. The orange jumpsuit was a far cry from her designer wardrobe, but she wore it with more dignity than she'd ever possessed in silk and diamonds. Across from her, FBI Special Agent Maria Santos shuffled through a stack of files thick enough to choke on. "Your cooperation has been invaluable, Ms. Reeves." Agent Santos spoke with the careful neutrality of someone who'd seen too much human wreckage to be surprised by anything.
Ow!
"The information you provided led to arrests in 17 countries. The Myanmar facilities have been shut down, the survivors relocated to proper medical care." Survivors? The word tasted bitter. How many? 43 children, 15 adults. Agent Santos paused, letting the numbers settle. "Because of your testimony, they're alive. That has to count for something." Lila stared at her reflection in the one-way mirror, seeing a woman she was still learning to recognize. Thinner than before, her cheekbones sharp with stress and institutional food. But her eyes were clear for the first time in years, no longer clouded by David's lies or her own willful blindness. What about David? Hartwell took his own life 3 days ago in federal custody. Agent Santos delivered the news with professional detachment, left a note claiming he was being persecuted for advancing medical science. The confession should have brought satisfaction, but Lila felt only emptiness. David's death wouldn't bring back the children who died in those hidden facilities. It wouldn't erase her role in enabling his crimes. Justice, she was learning, was far more complex than revenge. And Adrian Kane? Agent Santos's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "That's actually why I'm here today. Mr. Kane has made us an offer regarding your sentencing." The door opened before Lila could respond, and Adrian walked in wearing a dark suit that couldn't quite hide the new scars on his hands. 6 months had changed him too. The sharp edges were still there, but something had softened around his winter storm eyes. Or maybe she was just seeing him more clearly now. "Hello, Lila. I thought you'd be in witness protection by now." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I should be. Adrian took the chair opposite her, and she caught that familiar scent of rain and danger, but I have unfinished business. Agent Santos cleared her throat. Mr. Kane has been working with our international task force to identify other operations similar to Hartwell's. His field experience and Dr. Chen's research have been invaluable in tracking down remaining conspirators. That's not why I'm here. Adrian's gaze never left Lila's face. Tell her about the deal. The Justice Department is prepared to reduce your sentence to time served plus community service. Agent Santos slid a document across the table. In exchange for your continued cooperation with the task force, Lila scanned the legal language, her analytical mind processing the implications. What kind of cooperation? There are other companies. Other David Hartwells out there, Adrian said. People who hide behind legitimate business while funding unspeakable crimes. We need someone who understands how these operations work from the inside. You want me to be bait? I want you to be what you've always been. Brilliant, driven, and capable of seeing patterns others miss. Adrian leaned forward, his intensity filling the small room. The difference is now you'd be using those skills to save lives instead of destroy them. The offer hung between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Freedom, purpose, a chance to balance the scales of her own guilt. But Lila had learned not to trust easy solutions. What's the catch? You'd be working with me. Adrian's honesty was brutal as always. Undercover assignments, deep infiltration of criminal organizations, dangerous work with no guarantees of survival. Why would you want to work with someone you can't trust? Because I can trust you now. Adrian's smile was softer than she'd ever seen it. You proved that when you exposed your own crimes, along with David's. Someone motivated purely by self-interest wouldn't have done that. Agent Santos stood, gathering her files. I'll give you some privacy to discuss this. But we need an answer within the hour. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Lila alone with the man who'd turned her world upside down. They sat in silence for a long moment, years of manipulation and betrayal hanging heavy in the recycled air. You don't owe me anything, Adrian said finally. What I did to you, using your feelings for David to get information, it was wrong. I told myself the ends justified the means, but that was just another lie. We both used each other. Lila's fingers traced the edge of the contract. The question is whether we can move past that. I don't know. Adrian's admission surprised her with its vulnerability. I've spent so long focused on revenge that I'm not sure I know how to do anything else. Neither do I. Lila met his eyes, seeing her own uncertainty reflected there. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we need to learn together. This won't be easy. The work, the danger, trying to build something real between people as damaged as we are. Adrian reached across the table, his scarred fingers brushing hers. Are you sure you want to try? Lila thought about David's penthouse, about the woman she'd been who'd valued safety over truth. That woman was dead, killed by her own hand when she pressed send on those damning files. What remained was someone harder, more honest, and infinitely more dangerous. Tired of being safe, she said, signing her name to the contract, with steady strokes. And I'm tired of being someone else's weapon, even if that someone is me, especially then. Lila smiled, and the expression felt like coming home to herself. If we're going to do this, we do it as equals, partners, not puppets. Adrian nodded, understanding passing between them like a current. They were both broken people, scarred by betrayal and loss. But perhaps that brokenness could be shaped into something stronger than either of them could be alone. There's one more thing, Adrian said as Agent Santos knocked on the door. The first case they want us to work involves a pharmaceutical company in Eastern Europe. Similar mode to David's operation, but bigger. International trafficking, illegal experimentation, connections to human slavery rings. How much bigger? Expression went dark with familiar rage. Think David's operation multiplied by 10, with backing from organized crime syndicates in 3 countries. The magnitude of what he was describing should have terrified her. Instead, Lila felt something she hadn't experienced in months. anticipation, purpose, the electric thrill of a challenge worthy of her abilities. "When do we leave? Tomorrow morning?" Adrian stood as Agent Santos entered the room. "Think you're ready to save the world?" Lila looked at the contract she'd just signed, then at the man who'd offered her a chance at redemption wrapped in deadly risk. 6 months ago, she'd been David Hartwell's beautiful weapon. Now she was being offered the chance to become something far more dangerous, her own person. Let's find out. 2 years had carved new lines around Adrian's eyes, but they were laugh lines now, not just the deep grooves of pain. He stood in the doorway of their Prague safe house, watching Lila work at 3 different computers simultaneously, her fingers dancing across keyboards with the same deadly precision she'd once used to build David's empire. "The Kozlov operation is finished," he said, setting down 2 cups of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. "Interpol has the evidence. The children are safe, and Viktor Kozlov will spend the rest of his life in a very small cell." Lila didn't look up from her screens, but he saw her shoulders relax. How many this time? 67 survivors. Youngest was 4 years old. She stopped typing then, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the cold coffee. They'd learned not to celebrate these victories too loudly. Every child saved was a reminder of how many they'd been too late to help. "That makes 412, she said quietly. "In 2 years. Who's counting?" "I am." Lila finally turned to face him, and Adrian saw the weight she carried in her dark eyes. "I count every one. The saved and the lost." He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, feeling the familiar contours of her body against his. Years of working together, sleeping together, bleeding together had forged something between them that he'd never thought possible. Not love exactly. Something deeper than that. Recognition, understanding, the knowledge that they were both permanently broken but somehow fit together anyway. "Can't save them all," he murmured against her hair. "No, but we can save the ones we can reach." Lila pulled back to look at him, and he saw the steel that had replaced the softness David had tried to cultivate. The Prague operation was just the beginning. "I've found connections to trafficking rings in 7 other countries." "Lila, I know. What you're going to say? We need rest. We need to process what we've been through. We need to be human for a while." She moved away from him, pacing to the window that overlooked the city they'd just helped liberate. "But there are children in cages tonight who don't have the luxury of our emotional recovery time." Adine studied her profile against the evening light. Seeing the woman she'd become over 2 years of the most dangerous work imaginable, she was magnificent and terrifying, brilliant and relentless. She was also slowly destroying herself with guilt and purpose in equal measure. "What if I said I wanted out?" he asked carefully. "Then you'd be lying." Lila turned back to him, her smile sharp as a blade. "You need this as much as I do. The hunt, the risk, the knowledge that we're balancing the scales of our own sins? Maybe. But what happens when we've paid our debt? When we've saved more lives than we've cost? That's not how it works." Lila's voice carried a certainty that chilled him. "There's no cosmic ledger sheet where good deeds cancel out bad ones. The children who died because of my work with David don't come back to life because I've saved others. So what then? We do this until we're killed, till we burn out completely. We do this until we can't anymore." She moved closer, her hands finding his face with familiar tenderness, "and then we do it a little longer." Adrian captured her hands, feeling the calluses that had replaced her once perfect manicure. These weren't the soft fingers of David's polished weapon. These were the hands of a woman who'd learned to fight for something beyond herself. "I got a call from Agent Santos yesterday," he said. "There's talk of promoting us to head up a new international task force. Official government backing, unlimited resources, the authority to operate across borders without the usual diplomatic red tape." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd discuss it with my partner, your partner." Lila's smile softened, becoming something genuine and warm. "I like the sound of that. Even if your partner is a damaged former researcher with a talent for violence and an unhealthy obsession with revenge? Especially then," Lila's fingers traced the scar on his jaw, a souvenir from their second mission together. "We're both monsters, Adrian. The difference is, we've chosen to be monsters who protect the innocent. The confession hung between them, like a prayer. They'd never pretended to be good people, not after everything they'd done and seen. But they'd found something more valuable than goodness. It found purpose. Adrian's phone buzzed against the table, displaying a message from Agent Santos. Another lead, another organization hiding atrocities behind legitimate business. Children somewhere in the dark, waiting for salvation they didn't even know was coming. The Marconi Group in Milan, he said, reading the brief. Pharmaceutical. Research with suspected human trafficking connections. They want us there by Monday. That's 3 days from now. Lila was already moving toward her laptop, her analytical mind shifting into high gear. I can have preliminary intelligence by morning, full operational profile by Sunday night. Or Adrian said, catching her hand before she could start typing, we could take Agent Santos up on her offer. Run the new task force from Washington. Coordinate operations instead of executing them personally. You want to become bureaucrats. I want to keep you alive. The words came out more raw than he'd intended. Every mission we take increases the chances that one of us doesn't come home. Eventually, the odds will catch up. Lila studied his face, and he saw her reading the fear he'd tried to hide. 2 years of watching her walk into danger had worn away his carefully constructed emotional armor. Somewhere along the way, keeping her safe had become more important than his own need for redemption. You're afraid, she said, not accusingly, but with wonder, terrified. Adrian pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. I spent so long focused on revenge that I forgot what it felt like to have something to lose. Now, I have you. And I'm scared every day that this work will take you away from me. It might. Lila's honesty was brutal and beautiful. But would you really want me to be safe while children are dying in cages? Could you live with yourself knowing we could have made a difference but chose comfort instead? Adrian closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her challenge. She was right, of course. They were both too damaged, too driven, too aware of the darkness in the world to ever truly rest. But perhaps that was exactly what made them effective. The task force position comes with one advantage, he said finally. We could build a team, train others to do what we do. Multiply our impact exponentially. A team of broken people like us. Who else would volunteer for this kind of work? Adrian smiled, seeing the possibility spark in her eyes. Former victims, survivors, people with their own reasons for fighting. Monsters. Lila pulled away, pacing to the window again, as her mind worked through the implications. We could create something permanent, an organization that outlasts us, continues the work even after we're gone. Is that a yes to the promotion? It's a yes to building something bigger than revenge. She turned back to him, and Adrian saw the woman she'd become over 2 years of blood and bullets and small victories. But we take the Milan job first, together. One last field operation before we become the people who send others into the dark. One last mission as partners. Last mission as the people we used to be. Lila moved into his arms, and he felt the familiar electricity that crackled between two damaged souls who'd found their perfect match. After that, we become something new. They stood together in the gathering darkness of Prague, two former weapons who'd learned to choose their own targets. Tomorrow, they would hunt monsters in Milan. Next month, they would build an army of survivors in Washington. But tonight, they were simply Adrian and Lila, holding on to each other against the weight of all they'd lost and all they'd gained. Do you ever regret it? Adrian asked. Walking away from David's penthouse that night, you could have stayed silent, kept your comfortable life. Never. Lila's voice carried absolute certainty. That woman in the penthouse was already dead. She just didn't know it yet. And this woman is the one who saved 412 lives. This woman is finally alive. Lila smiled, and Adrian saw himself reflected in her eyes. Scarred, dangerous, irrevocably changed by violence and loss, but alive in a way that safety had never allowed. We both are. Outside their window, Prague glittered with the lights of 8 million people going about their ordinary lives, unaware that two former monsters had just decided to spend the rest of their existence protecting that ordinariness. It was a beautiful sight, Adrian thought. All those people sleeping safely because someone was willing to walk into the darkness on their behalf. He kissed Lila then, tasting coffee and determination and the metallic tang of old blood that never quite went away. She kissed him back with the fierce hunger of someone who'd learned that love was just another battlefield, but one worth fighting on. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her head against his chest, and he felt her heartbeat synchronize with his own. Two hearts that had been broken so many times, they'd learned to beat in harmony. Milan, she whispered. Milan, he agreed, and in that single word was everything they'd become and everything they'd chosen to be, not the weapons others had forged them into, but the guardians they'd forged themselves. Broken, dangerous, and absolutely unstoppable. In the morning, they would hunt monsters again. Tonight, they held each other against the dark, the end asterisk. Like this video if the story touched your heart. Subscribe for more emotional tales, and share with someone who believes in the power of true love, and let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community of romance lovers. Asterisk. What did you think of Lila's transformation? Would you have made the same choices? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more intense psychological thrillers and complex character stories.